Welcome to the Men Talk Ubuntu podcast. Our guest this episode is Carol Maynard, a South Manchester-based psychotherapist who works with individuals, couples, and is a fan of nature. We met randomly through mutual friends and unwittingly connected over our common interests, passions, and advocacy. She explores psychosomatic elements with her clients, teaching how to share emotions healthily and helping understand what's happening in their relationships and lives. Personal therapy especially changed her life, and she works to continue supporting others with the same opportunity when they are brave enough to make change. Carol, it's a pleasure to have you here. Please tell us about your story and journey.
Do you know what? I love that you've taken that from what I've said, and it sounded great, so thank you. I really appreciate it. And I also really appreciate you inviting me on here. As you know, I haven't done a podcast before, and as you know, I have been apprehensive, but I'm really glad to be here. And I'm really glad in particular because when we met, like it was a surprise, and we didn't know that this conversation, or this would come from our conversation, let alone have the conversations we had. And I appreciate that you guys aren't actually therapists and that you're pioneering this. And I really like that because ordinarily you have people in the industry that are doing these sort of podcasts. So I think in that respect, I feel even more honoured and it's even more special. So thank you.
So in terms of my journey, so if I go back quite a number of years, about 6-7 years ago, I had not long been through a marriage breakup. So my long-term relationship had come to an end. And I was struggling, and I remember being really consumed by emotions and not being able to figure out what was happening, not understanding. And I was in my previous job, and there was a day where I just couldn't stop crying. And I spoke to somebody I knew, and one of their friends was a psychotherapist in Chorlton in South Manchester. And she said, "Why don't you just go and chat to her and see what happens?" So I went to chat to her, and then that's when I started personal therapy. And that journey has changed my life, and I'm a completely different person now. But if I go back to when I was younger, going to therapy is a complete contradiction to what I believed when I was younger. And I think I said this to you, Shai, is that I was surrounded by people who nobody I knew had ever had therapy. It wasn't a thing. I grew up in a household where emotions weren't spoken about. I didn't understand what was playing out in my relationship and my marriage. And even though I knew there were difficulties, I thought that's just what relationships are. And I just thought, well, this is what life is. And the common sort of theme and the message I believed is that you should be able to sort yourself out. And I carried that since I was born, but I was aware of it from the age of 17, 18. There's something about, just what about all this self-help stuff? You should be able to sort yourself out. I carried that through, but I got to a point where I reached out to somebody. I didn't expect that I would, but I did, and here we are now. And it was a really sort of pivotal moment. And I also knew that I wanted to change career, and it came around at a similar sort of time. I ended up becoming a therapist off the back of having my own therapy journey.
Amazing. Thank you, Carol. And that goes beautifully into our topic today. So today on Men's Talk, we talk about relationship patterns. But first, I'm intrigued to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you mentally?
Where am I mentally? I'm good today, actually. So I'm going to go for an 8.5. I think it might even be a little bit more. But today feels good. I think I got confused and thought the podcast was yesterday. So yesterday I was in a bit of a panic with that. So I'm actually more settled today. It's Friday. It's coming up to the weekend. You guys are super friendly and welcoming, and so I feel good, thank you. How about yourself? How are you doing today?
Myself, I would say, as I said before, outstanding but always improving. Definitely put myself the same place as you, a strong 8. The sun is out, it's Friday, and taking every day as it comes. And restrictions are coming down, so happy days.
That's fine. We can't leave you out.
I'm gonna say I'm a 7 and rising right now, and part of that is I soon become a bit older, so I'm in quite a reflective mood right now. So So yeah, birthday's coming up, creeping up on me. But yeah, I'm a 7. I suspect by the end of this, I'll be an 8. And by the end of the day, I'll be a 9.
Amazing.
When is your birthday, Shai?
It's July 22nd. That's all we're saying.
How old are you really?
Still 18. Lost the paperwork.
And that, you know, Mo, our friend in common, that's
yes.
Well.
Yeah, I just recently found that out. So I've got 2 friends who we were born on the same day, albeit a different year. So a lot of us celebrating. I think even, is it Israel, the UFC champ, Nigerian one? That's another one. So it's a beautiful day, you know. I think on mentioning 18, I actually wanted to ask you a bit more about younger you, if I may, Carol. When you were talking about your story and journey, it seemed when you had this event occur a few years ago and the emotions hit you, and like you described, you know, start crying and, you know, can't control all these things. Would you say you were perhaps emotional growing up, or when you were younger? I know you've said about the people around you not say, but perhaps believing in self-help and all that sort of thing, but for you, was this emotion quite alien, or this being overwhelmed by emotion quite alien, or is it something you'd experienced growing up? I don't want to make assumptions, you know, about girls being able to cry and everything. So just curious about that.
Yeah, and I like the question. I've not been asked before, so I've not really considered it. But I would say that I experienced a lot of extreme emotions, but I didn't know what they were, and I didn't know how to contain them, and I didn't know what they were maybe masking. And I would say that in the household I grew up in, some emotions weren't okay. So yeah, there were a lot of emotions. I felt a lot of stuff a lot of the time, but I didn't understand why, and I didn't understand what it actually was. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Pretty much to some extent.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't understand. Emotions were never modeled to me in my wider family, let alone the household I grew up in. I would say that there was an element of passive aggressive. There was an element of anger, you know, with my dad. He struggled to share his emotions, and I'll say a bit more about that later on as well. So a healthy emotional model just wasn't shown to me. I didn't learn about it. I didn't know about it. And we only know what is our familiar in that respect. So I probably condensed a lot of my emotions into several. So yeah, I just didn't understand what was happening in that respect. So I would say I was emotional. I also, thinking about it, as you've asked this question, I think I actually felt quite a lot of guilt for some of the emotions that I felt. And I felt like there was a sense of, I'm being oversensitive, these are not okay. And so I would imagine, in that respect, I suppressed a lot because of that, because I didn't think it was okay to show them. And I didn't know actually how. So I didn't know how to express healthy anger. Anger's, some of it is healthy for us and necessary, but I didn't know how to display that. So it would come out in the wrong way because I'd suppressed it so much, and it would manifest and then explode.
So out of curiosity, did you also have, because what you're saying also resonates with me in so many different ways. In my household, there wasn't such things as emotion. So, as you talked about channeling all sorts of emotions in different ways because you don't know what you don't know, that's the same thing that happened. And obviously, the older you get, the more you start to unlearn and relearn certain things. So I'm intrigued, like, did you have any siblings as well in your household that also had, quite similar emotions or stress and things like that, and how did you collectively go through that transition with your siblings as well?
Yeah, so if it's okay, there's probably a bigger story to this as well. So I grew up as the youngest child, so I was the only child to my dad. My mum had 3 children by her previous marriage, and I don't mind, and I don't think she would mind me sharing some of this as well. She had an incredibly tough relationship and marriage. So her husband used to beat her up, he was an alcoholic, and she had 3 children when she was very, very young, so 16, 17 and 18 years old. So by the time she was 18, she had 3 kids, and she was experiencing a lot of abuse in the home, which during that time was more acceptable, or it was glossed over, or it was not spoken about. So she just sort of dealt with it. I think there was a beating from her brother, and that was about it. And it was all just accepted that was the norm. And it's not until the last 5-6 years, or in particular last 5 years, I've really reflected on that and thought, wow, I grew up thinking that was the norm and that was okay, that my mum used to get really beaten up and abused by her husband. So and then I came along. So my brothers and sisters are 12, 13, 14 years older than me, so I was a lot younger. And my dad had taken them on as his children. He had lost his dad when he was really young, so he didn't know how to parent them. So that was a really tense relationship. They never really got on. And then I came to the equation. So I come from, I would say, a really dysfunctional setup in that respect, where things were just glossed over, things were accepted, things weren't talked about, and I now reflect on how tough it must have been for my brothers and sisters. And at the time I would never have even acknowledged that or reflect on that at all, but they would have had an incredibly tough upbringing with their, knowing that that's something was going on with their mum and dad in that respect, and their dad leaving and coming into a new household with a really strict dad, and then being told that they were just naughty and they were delinquents, and 2 of them went to boarding school because of that. So this journey of the last however many years I've reflected so much on how tough that would have been for them. So in answer to your question, I didn't share that with them, and I actually felt quite solitary in that, working things out on my own and going on my own journey, if that answers your question there. And I know I've added some more information to that as well, but to give a bit of context to all.
No, definitely. And, everything you're saying, again, definitely does resonate, because even when you're young, it was always the case of like, you bury these old emotion and, without even realizing, you think that, time is going to heal that pain and sorrow kind of thing. But when you actually take time to kind of start that journey of exploring, processing, reversing, and just unpacking all those things start to obviously become much more clearer and better, and you get, well, I've had more understanding regarding that. So yeah,
your point there, Ray, I think is a really good one, and one to talk about, because I have a lot of clients that I meet with, and their belief is, oh well, that happened years ago, why does that matter now? That was 10 years ago, or that was when I was 8, or whenever. And we're just not taught that all of that stuff stays with us unless we're processed. I've got this next to my desk, because I always think we're like Russian dolls. And a lot of clients really like technology, and it's a simple one, but it really helps them. So, this is us. We carry all of our, emotions and experiences with us. And so, this is us when we're born, and then, all those emotions and experiences in those years stay with us. And that's the stuff that we're struggling with later on. But a lot of people do think, well, that's in the past. Like, why, I'm whatever age now, why does that matter? So, I think that's a really good point, and something that people just aren't aware of. We're not taught that in school, are we? So when we're struggling with, often this is a really common thing that clients will say. They'll say, I'm really bothered by this, or I keep getting upset by this, or this keeps happening. And then they'll say to themselves, but that's ridiculous, I'm stupid, why am I crying, why am I getting upset, that's just really annoying, I wish I didn't. And what they're talking about there are the 2 parts of them. There may be more parts, but the younger part of themselves that's still trying to deal with and cope with or process something that's happened. And then the part of them that's their age now, whatever it is, saying, well, that doesn't fit who I am now. So it doesn't make sense to people until, you start having these conversations, until talking in parts really helps people as well. I think it really helped me. Like, okay, that part's still part of me. I still carry it in me. I wonder what's stored in there.
And out of those Russian dolls, if we go from where you are now to the smallest one, which is, the smallest version of yourself, youngest version of yourself, what kind of advice or words of encouragement would you say to your younger self?
Oh, do you know, there's actually a really lovely exercise that I do with clients that is this, and it's really, it can be really, really emotional, and it has to be the right time to help them essentially process. So there's an exercise that I do with clients where I invite them to close their eyes, and then I talk them through, and I get them to imagine the younger self of whatever age is important to them. And then they say to there's a nuance to this compared to what you've just asked there, is they say to their younger self what their younger self never heard, and what the words of support or care that would have really benefited their younger self that they never got. So there's a twist on kind of what you've said. But if I was to talk to my younger self, it would be around telling myself that I'm okay and that I'm good enough. That for me has been a real core of my therapy journey, believing that I'm okay and that I'm good enough and not doubting myself. And what would you say, Ray? Do you have
To my younger self, I would say to myself, don't be so angry, don't be so cold, don't be so closed off. Just live life to the fullest and find allies that will help, support, and guide you to a new paradigm. So that's what I'd say to myself. But more importantly, enjoy everything, and also more importantly, enjoy the time that you have with your grandmother. So yeah.
I'm wanting to ask you questions, but I know this is
feel free. I'm an open book. I gave out too much there.
make me think. I'm very much a why person, so when I then want to inspire, and I was wondering about your anger, because when you said that, it really resonates with me because of the environment I grew up with an angry dad. If I label him that, he was very angry, and I just wondered if you know now where your anger came from, and if you have some understanding about them.
Yeah, I've got a lot more understanding of where it stemmed from. I think for me, so even though I've got a daughter now as well, one thing that she's taught me, or not that I've learned for myself, she has taught me and still continues to teach me so many things in life. So essentially for me, it's the fact that obviously it's a different generation. So, even though I had a stepdad, me and my stepdad didn't have the best relationship, and there wasn't that line of communication, or there wasn't any understanding that was brought to me to kind of transition, whether it was my mum and stepdad being together all the way through to having siblings. It's just that I personally think it's all about, especially when it comes to having a child, having that open line of communication that, do you know what, no matter how old you are, I'm going to speak to you and tell you that, you're either going to have a brother or sister, or I'm going to be with this person, and I need you to come on that journey with me, as opposed to me go on that journey by myself, and then you're at the end of it, finding out lastminute.com, and you're pretty much uneased, really, really nervous and unsettled kind of thing. Yeah, I'd say the fact that there wasn't that communication though, but now I've come to a place where I've, sat down with, my mum, we have these open conversations, and we're able to kind of, undo certain things, because again, it's also tradition, because of that the generation before us and the generation before that, it's like an ongoing thing of how the parent and the adult is, whereas now things are basically changing. It's like, you're opening up the lines of communication, not just being a friend, but more being a guidance and support mechanism, and just enabling that love that you most probably wasn't reciprocated previously, if that makes sense. So I would say that a lot of my journey ever since I've had my daughter has enabled me to kind of unpack all of that. And just because, again, when I was younger, I didn't know how to deal with certain emotions, whereas now, rather than me being that reactive parent, I'm going back to my daughter and saying, okay, how do you feel? What's this? You know, what's that? Like, let's dig deep, because I'm here to help and support you at the end of the day. But again, you know, there's no manual, there's no guidance. That's just how I'm, you know, doing my parenting and my life kind of thing.
I really like what you've said there about your relationship with your daughter, because what you've acknowledged there is a lot of what's happened previously and still happens in a lot of families now. It's not just because we're in 2021 and things have changed, but it's actually acknowledging that child's feelings and thoughts and opinions, and rather than telling them you shouldn't feel like this, or don't feel like that, or don't cry, or I'll give you something to cry about, and like you said, not communicating what's going on, so they just really don't have that sense of self, or that their emotions are okay. So I really like what you said there about how you're parenting your daughter right now. It sounds great.
Appreciate that.
I'm just here soaking all of it in. Like, there's a lot of profound thoughts being shared, and a lot of, for me, fascinating sort of connections, if you will, or overlap in a way that we don't usually think about. Starting from just the very facts, I think the way you were describing, Carol, some of those challenges with dealing with emotions, in particular when you picked up on anger and not knowing how to express it, and it only coming out later on in the wrong ways, in unhealthy ways, if you will. That's something a lot of men, we've spoken to, struggle with a lot. And it seems like there are these moments, if you're gifted with them and choose to pursue them, where you get this perspective or a level of awareness raised within you. And for you, it was one of those moments. For Ray, a lot of it has been since his daughter was born. But once you start that process of trying to sort yourself out, unpack the Russian doll, you skip a few of them because some of those stages, we don't necessarily. It takes some time to revisit them. But this idea of being ashamed of certain points in our history and in our lives, and some of the decisions we might have made, or the way we acted or didn't act, maybe because we weren't brave enough, and moving on to the next layer of our life and the next layer. And at some point you still have to go back, because that's part of you, it's part of who you are. You can ignore it and just march forward straight ahead, but there's going to be something that would, I think, trigger you and make you come back. And this idea as well of the household that we're in versus just the company that we keep as well. It struck me as you were both talking about your younger selves, as a child. I think as much as you want attention and affection, I feel like stability or safety, whether that's, we're going to go psychological safety or physical safety, seems to be at the core what we're really after. And when I was trying to answer some of the questions as well, of course, and I was there thinking about when I felt angry as a kid, or why I maybe chose to express things. It's when I felt things were out of my control, or when things were done to me, and again, I couldn't do anything about it. It was just enacted upon me. So you're too small to fight back. You're the youngest, I'm the youngest. I think you take your losses, you take your L's at a certain point. And I feel like a lot of people also may be listening, even as an adult, it goes back to when you're at work and things are overwhelming, you have no control over it. It's your boss telling you what to do. When you go home for family functions or something like that, and you fall back into whichever layer of the Russian doll, that stage you were at in life, because we've had this thing where people will say, I'll go home, even though I'm in my 50s or whatever, I'm getting treated like I'm still that kid. And so there's these roles almost we want to break out of. But yeah, it was fascinating, because it made me think again about the whole Ubuntu ethos of, it's just, we're all a common people. I am, because you are, like, we all want to feel safe. We all want to be loved, and almost different ways, but we all want at the core the same things, whether we're men or women, young or old. And it was really fascinating to hear you both sort of go back and forth and share quite different experiences, but very similar experiences, and just find that common ground. That was just resonating with each of you. There's a lot there.
Thank you for listening to Men Talk Ubuntu podcast and being a valued member of our community. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube, Instagram, and other social media now for access to our latest updates. DM us and let us know what your mental health is on a scale of 1 to 5. Thank you.
You said now as well, as I'm hearing you speak, there's tons you've said that I could pull on as well. And one thing I will say is this is really refreshing to talk like this, because ordinarily, and I know certainly in my past, you don't have chats like this. You go to the pub or whatever, when I was younger, and it's not about this stuff. So I do want to say thank you, because I love these sort of conversations. So I find it really refreshing that we're chatting like this. So yeah, thank you. Midway, thank you. There's tons what you've said there as well, and the safety bit. I think when we chat a bit about relationships, that's massively important to talk about. And then what you were saying there about your inner child, that's a model that I use a lot with clients, and I tend to draw it on a board as well. Are you familiar with parent, adult, child? Have you ever heard of that model?
I have, with
No.
Eric Byrne.
Eric Byrne, yeah.
I feel a bit left out here. What's going on, Carol?
Secrets for you. Yeah, Eric Byrne, transactionalisis. I'll draw it quickly if you don't mind me drawing a little thing. And I'll draw like a really basic one. But yeah, basically what you said is about our inner child, and so this is some of the work that I do with clients. So it's a really simple model, and it's got 3 ego states, and you've got your parent, adult, and child there. So we can refer to this throughout the podcast, if you like, and throughout the chat. But it's helping people understand basically, what's stored in their emotional self, what's stored in there in kind of their taught self, in terms of those, what our internalized parents, and what we're told we should and shouldn't do. And then we carry all of this. And then we've got all of this swirl of emotions and stuff that we don't understand from the child. So we can come back to this model if it helps bring some context to what we're talking about.
I think all those things have something in common, which I think is when we speak about the child element, the adult, the parent, and just an individual, again, putting in reference of the actual, the dolls as well. There's one word that strikes to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you can think of any other word, but I would say validation.
Yeah, what makes you come up with? How did you get there?
I think as a child, when you're obviously born, it's just like a computer. You have no programs, no applications. Depending on what environment you go in, it kind of programs you in a certain kind of way. And no matter what environment you're in, if you're not getting the right updates or validations or attention and things like that, that goes into your adult. And again, from one relationship, from being a child to going into teenage, adult, and things like that, that validation is a continuous thing. And then even as a parent, not only do you want validation, but a lot of the time you also want to give validation, or you most probably don't know how. So it's that thing of you don't know how, you don't know where to start. And again, everyone's programmed different. We don't know everything at the end of the day. So yeah, my word is validation. So, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you've said 2 massive things there, and I really like that word. So I think like massive tick, because validation, you've nailed it in terms of the relationship therapy that I do. That is like the crux of it. That is, it's about teaching and validation. And then to your other point, we only know what we know, and we only know so much. And we only know what we're familiar with. And that is a huge point, is that if we're not taught something, if we don't know how to give something and how to receive something, we don't know. And so, oh God, there's loads I can say here, but in terms of validation, and well, if I say often we'll go through life and we'll say, oh, I really want I really want to be closer to people. I really want to be this or do this. But often we might say that we want something, but actually receiving that and being in that space is a completely different thing. And it can be really uncomfortable. We just don't know how to receive it. You know, some people on a more simple level don't know how to receive compliments. They'd like more, or they'd like to give them, but they don't know how to give them. They don't know how to receive them. So you've picked up on something else that's really massive in terms of, you know, in terms of therapy. We only know what we know, and sometimes we don't even know how to give it or how to receive it. But yeah, I think validation could be a core word for some of this that we're going to talk about. I like it.
You know, I'm starting to like it too. It's made me think now, like when you're a child, or I don't know how old the child is, but all you get is attention and love showered at you, you know, presents, whatever. The world revolves around you, especially if you're a baby, right? Like that's all you get. And then to some extent, as a parent, if you had a child, you struggle with what gives you worth or what gives you validation as a parent. If you have a child and you get that unconditional love from the child grows up and hopefully they look after you, maybe not so much in the UK context, but more so say in an African context, as this unwritten contract. I look after you as a baby, you look after me in my old age, all right? And then it made me think it's that middle bit, the adult, where the validation might not be being poured at you because you're 18, get out the house, we've raised you. So that attention might stop. There's the unlimited supply you used to get as a child, all that, every problem, not everybody. And you might not yet have the thing that makes you feel your sense of worth has been achieved, or that gets you praise from other people, because now you might be moving around in different circles, which is why you might latch on to the wrong kind of circles, because they might be the first ones to give you some form of validation and say you're amazing and you're worthwhile, or we have a use for you, if you will, as an adult, because that's where you sort of go out into the wilderness and are supposed to make your way in life. Hopefully you find the right people. Can
I put a different spin on that?
Would that yeah. Please, yeah.
Might be. It's just how I'm thinking. You know, and when I'm talking about this is my what I piece together from my training, from my theory, from what I do, from what's worked for me. So whether it's right or wrong, but the way I heard that is that there are some people that have had a lot of attention when they're younger, and perhaps it may have been too much, and so they may not have developed enough adult. So they may be you know, too much in their child in some respects, and then they don't know how to go out into the adult world. So does that fit what you were saying, or is it a slightly different slant on it?
Yeah. I'll refine my thinking even more. So I mean, it's difficult to make this simple because it's complex. If we were to pick an individual and try and unpack where they fit, would hear all the other factors and circumstantial issues that, you know, we're not considering when we say this. The key thing for me is one of the words that I think you used was want when you were talking with Ray and stuff. Want, and the things that we want, whether we're child, parent, adult. And for me, want indicates lack, if you see what I mean. Not in a negative way, but you want to eat when you're hungry. You know, you want to drink when you're thirsty. You know you need to, but when you want something, it's usually because you don't have it. So if you are operating in the child level, you want validation. The form of validation that you're after or that you're seeking, whether that's I want to do really well, I've become very successful because I want people to acknowledge me for my success, to tell me that I do really well. I want to be really good looking. I'm going to get loads of surgery. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to learn to fight, or I'm going to get into loads of fights because I'm never going to be weak. I want to be seen as strong. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to be cool. You know, I'm going to change everything. Perhaps because so the want that you are after is linked to a lack in some way. And if you're not aware of what the lack is, you might behave in ways and not really understand why you keep finding yourself in the same situation. Whereas if you become aware somehow, then you can, better identify what's a want, maybe, or what's a need, because this is what helps you function, and appreciate that you don't always have to go for the wants that you have, because that might just be something that you felt you were lacking at a stage in your life, somewhere in that Russian doll. But when you really address it and you maybe become comfortable with it, or you can see that you've achieved that or received it in other ways, then I don't know if that quite makes sense, or if it's come across.
I was going to bring some more theory into it. It may or not resonate.
Bring it.
My board looks really messy, this one, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. So I'm half rubbed out and half.
We're getting this for free. Yes.
So the bit when you're talking, this has reminded me of in sort of transaction analysis, Eric Byrne style psychotherapy. We're talking about what are called drivers, and so these are early ways that we learn to try and get validation, or we think we're going to get validation. We think we're going to get noticed, and we're going to get the love that we want and that we deserve. So we go through life. So if I read them out, because some of what you said really fits in. So and for me, actually, ordinarily people have one that's more of a resonates with them more, but ordinarily there's two there, but one would probably stand out. So there's please others, be perfect. I always put try hard, work hard, but it's officially work hard, but I always put try hard, work hard, be strong, and hurry up. So please others is a really common one in the therapy room. So if I continuously make other people happy, if I put other people before myself, then I will get the validation and the love and the recognition and the praise that I deserve. If I get everything right, if I'm really, really perfect, if I get this perfect, and I'll get the validation I deserve in a very seeking way. If I work really, really hard, so this one translates into adulthood, where somebody's working long hours and they're continuously trying to, get promoted, but again, it's that early child often that's trying to get recognized. If I be strong and don't show my emotions, so it might have been a message, it might have been either explicit messages or implicit messages as well, so there's a difference there, but it could be, none of that crying, come on, get on with it, big boys don't cry, if we're talking in terms of men, context of men. So that be strong, like, okay, if I'm really strong, if I show that I can handle everything and I don't show that I'm soft, I will get validation. And sometimes this work hard is when young childs come home from school and they take their schoolwork to their parent and they're desperate for their parents to say, oh, you've done amazingly well, but they often don't get that response. And then that hurry up one, that often clients feel that on a really somatic body level. So there's that almost panic of, I've got to do everything at once, I've got to get here really, really quickly. If I do that, then I will get the recognition. So but I will also say with all of those five, there's always positive and negative. You can split them in half, because some of it, clients will often say, well, because of that I've achieved this, or because of that I've done well here, and so I'll always say, yeah, absolutely, and that's great, and let's keep that, but let's talk about what hasn't served you so well, or maybe where it's got in the way, and maybe where it's hindering you in the experience you want now and where you want to be now, and how it's played a part. So that I just thought I'd bring that in, because it seemed to link to what you were saying about, if I do really well, if I do this, I will get noticed, I will get validated. Does that fit some of what you were thinking and bring some context to it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it resonates with me personally as well, which I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but even as you were saying it, I could see some of my own actions as a child, even now, I suppose, with some of the things I try and do, in order to get some sort of recognition or appreciation, and because part of it might be helping others, where you almost take it to the extreme of, I want to be seen as helping others, and this is my thing. And often in doing so, neglecting yourself, which,
well, So if you think about vicariously while we're doing something, so often when I'm working with a client and they have the please others is a dominant dominant driver for them. And I don't always use labels as well, so some people don't feel comfortable with this, but I'm using something here that resonates with me. It doesn't work with every therapist. But if that please others is obvious, often what I'll say to clients is, okay, who do you imagine you actually are really doing it for? And what usually transpires is that they're trying, it's because they want the other person to like them. So there's that vicarious incentive and reason that if I please others, then they will like me. And sometimes with the please others, there's a lot of squashing of emotion as well. So I won't show that I'm upset. I won't show that I'm annoyed that they've made me work when I didn't want to work that shift when I didn't want to, all things like that. So there's a real squashing and denying of emotions that comes with all of those, but the please others for sure.
Wow, that took me back to anger. And it made me think, when you've got a child or a baby or someone really young, when they're angry, happy, angry, sad, whatever, they just express it. But certain emotions like anger, you almost get told not to express those, because because you're little and you can't talk to an adult that way. You can cry, you can say happy things, but often not the angry one. So that's when I feel like you learn how to bottle up quite early on. You can't have a tantrum, you can't kick off. And then later on, if you don't know how to express it, then, or it becomes a way of, again, pleasing others. So like, you're angry, you want to express that you're angry, but you let others have the benefit of the doubt, or not the benefit of the doubt. You prioritize how they feel and how they'll be affected, and you choose to consume your anger or let your anger consume you, rather than express it and potentially be rid of it, and maybe even the relationship you have with that person be better.
Yeah, this is a big bit for relationship therapy as well, being able to say what's happening for you.
So sorry, Tenti J. I was actually gonna ask, when we go fast forward into the next little mini use of your journey as well, and or this can also be generalization as well. I'm really intrigued to kind of understand the relationship of when, let's say, for instance, you had your first relationship in terms of being validated, all the way through, or better yet, even further back, of where your validation came from in terms of your dad, all the way through to your first relationship, your marriage kind of thing as well. And what were the key drivers, and what did you learn from it?
So if I just check out what I heard you say, so you're wondering about whether or not I did get validated in my childhood, whether or not I did feel validated in my marriage, and then where I found that validation.
Yeah.
So I would say that no, there was, if I talk about, I'll put some context to what I believe validation is, in a relationship. And this is friendship, romantic relationship, work relationship, whatever it might be. It's that safe space for somebody to say, and there's a nuance here as well in terms of owning it rather than blaming. So the moment we point the finger at somebody, the other person's blatantly going to get defensive. It's natural, isn't it? You want to defend yourself and be like, hang on a minute. But if part of this is teaching people to recognize their stuff as well, but a safe space for somebody to say, when that happened, I noticed I felt like this, and then for that other person to say, yeah, I get you, that makes sense, rather than trying to say, well, you shouldn't feel like that, that's ridiculous that you do, trying to defend themselves, trying to overcome it, trying to explain, all the ifs, buts, and what. So the moment somebody doesn't hear the other person, the moment they try and defend and explain and talk over them or tell them they shouldn't, that's when your validation goes. Validation is about saying, yeah, I get it, and you're allowed to feel that way, that's okay. In the moment we can do that for the other person, that is just transformational in terms of them being able to feel their feelings and express their emotions. And when we don't validate that, again, they get into that stuck, they get stuck in terms of suppressing. So that's what I believe validation is. And no, I don't believe I experienced that growing up. I don't think we knew how to as a family. I don't think in my wider family, which is a big family, my mum's one of 12 kids. I've got a couple of cousins who I'm really close to, and we do that with each other. But other than that, I don't think my family actually know how. It was never taught to them. And then my ex and I got really, really stuck in this way because, shall I bring in about relationships here, or shall I save that for a bit further?
Please, be our guest.
Oh, my mind is already there.
Yeah, my relationship is a sort of reference point to what I would say about relationships as well. Then it might probably lead us on to some of this and relationship patterns, like you were saying. So if we think about the stages of a relationship, and this is a model of relationship therapy that I really, really believe in, and that I'm trained in, that I use with couples. Again, it may or may not fit for everybody, but it certainly resonated with me when I first found out about it. And I thought, wow, I wish I knew about this form of relationship therapy when I was struggling in my marriage. And it's called Imago. It's spelled IMAGO, which is Latin for image. And I can say more about it. But it's originally a guy called Harville Hendricks came up with it. He's a therapist, and he'd struggled himself in a couple of relationships and thought, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And so he talks about the stages of a relationship. So when we meet, and I kind of put my own time frame to this, but we can have that romantic stage that can last anything from 3 minutes to 3 years. So, when you meet somebody like, wow, I fancy the pants off you, I want to spend all my time with you. And I think Harville Hendricks uses this phrase like, you like pasta, I like pasta, we like, everything's the same, and you just think, oh no, you're amazing. And then that can wear off quite quickly or after some time, but it's a shock when it wears off. But the bit I'll say is like, it's really, really ordinary. Like, it's so ordinary for it to wear off, and all of this is okay. So he talks about that romantic stage, which I think is really, really applicable. And then he talks about a power struggle stage. And so there's a rupture, and that rupture can be of all different shapes and sizes. Something has happened to change the dynamic of the relationship. And when that rupture happens, there's loads I can say to this actually, but when that rupture happens, you end up in that defense and attack mode. So the communication goes, that safety goes, the trust goes, whatever it might be. You are not hearing each other, and you're not feeling and being heard. So when you're trying to have a chat and trying to communicate, ordinarily all you're doing is listening to your own internal process and dialogue, thinking, I can't believe you said that, you're out of order, you said you'd do that and you didn't. So we're just busy listening to that. We're not even hearing the thing the other person's saying, and we're just loading our gun ready to fire back, and they're doing the same, and you just don't get anywhere. And so I spent quite a while in that phase with in my marriage, and it was really unenjoyable. It was really, really tough. And I remember thinking, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know how to solve it. I had no way. I had no tools. I had no family members I could lean on who would help. And so we just got so stuck. And we got stuck in a familiar dynamic, which I say familiar, I think it's familiar for a lot of people. I felt like the parent, and he felt like the child. And the more this happened, the more I felt like I was bossing him around, having a go at him, and the more he went into his child and just gave up that sort of adult space. So we got really, really, really stuck, and it was really difficult, and I just didn't know any way out of it at all. So back to your question, we just actually didn't know how to validate each other. We had no idea. We took everything massively personally. Well, I certainly did. But I imagined he did as well, knowing what I know now. So there was zero validation. I would say that I learned to feel validated through some amazing friends that I found over the last sort of 6 years or so in particular. And then also through the relationship with my therapist. And she's given me so much validation and permission to be who I am. And that's that sense of being really, really heard. So that's all come from outside of my family unit. I said a lot there, didn't I?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. First and foremost. No, it's a lot, but it's really, I mean, it had my mind abuzz. It made me think, even with relationships, 3 minutes to 3 years, I love that. This idea of a big part of it might be the more connected you feel with someone, I guess the more you want to share about yourself and what you want, what you like, all those sorts of things, and what you really think as you get more comfortable and you feel safe around this person. And then it struck me that it's in that moment, as you get more comfortable and you express more, the other person, or both of you, as you both express more, start to perhaps get uncomfortable with some of the things that are being expressed, because like, oh, whoa, now we're moving away from just the lovey-dovey stuff. Now you're getting into my space. Now you're touching onto something that, for me, is not a good deal. And then I say that's where sometimes you get into the defensive mode, or you want to just shift away because you think, oh, okay, I've seen this before, but perhaps at the core it's triggering something else. Right, well, a circle, yeah.
There's also some bits that are really important to this part as well. So if we think about what we take into a relationship, and for me, I had no idea this was happening, because this is all out of awareness. We're not conscious of it until we become conscious of it. And that's part of the therapy that I do with all clients, but with couples, is to bring it into the consciousness. Like, okay, this is what's playing out. This is what's happening. This is all okay as well. Everything. I believe we're made to think that you should have these perfect relationships, and that you're a failure if you haven't. And people are so guarded about whether, secretive about if they're struggling in their relationship because it's embarrassing, or all of these things, and everyone else has got an amazing relationship. But it's so ordinary. If you think about two completely separate human beings with completely different logic and experience of being as well, completely different upbringings, back to what we were saying earlier about what you become familiar with and what's your normal familiar, and then they try and coexist. Like, surely for me, that's a guarantee that there's going to be challenges. Like, now I know that, I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, we're two completely different people. But we go into this relationship thinking, well, you need to really understand me, and the other person's like, you really need to understand me, and we have whatever dynamic it is. And so both partners end up pissed off because you're not understanding me, I'm right, you're wrong, all this business is going on. But I'll go back to my early point, but all of that is really ordinary as well. There's no right or wrong, but we take our childhood stuff into relationships. This is the bit as well that really resonated with me. So all of our unmet needs, all of our wounds, the stuff we didn't get fixed, the stuff we were unable to fix when we were younger. If you think about carrying a couple of suitcases, and we go into those relationships without even knowing, and we're scanning for somebody that fits this imago, as we put it, and that imago is full of all the stuff that our caregivers modeled to us, how they related to us, how they communicated with us, how they didn't communicate with us, the wounds that were left, all that stuff. So we look for somebody that's our familiar, and that for me sounds really obvious as well, but we don't know any of this. So we find something like, okay, you fit my familiar, you're amazing. But our child, out of awareness, is going, all right, now I can get my needs met. All the stuff that didn't get sorted when I was younger, this person's going to meet all my needs for me. Amazing. So like to your point, Shai, we start loading all this expectation and needs, and all of our old wounds get bared into the relationship without either partner knowing what's really going on. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what's all this? And there's that dynamic of, well, I'm not getting my needs met. They're not fulfilling everything I expected them to. They're not, I put them on a pedestal and I had all these hopes, but it's all of our unmet childhood stuff that's playing out. We're playing psychological games to get our needs met, and they're not working, and we just end up in a really difficult situation. So I thought I'd bring some context to that in terms of what we take into relationships as well.
Hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed creating.
Don't forget to follow, like, share, and connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our latest episode and listen to any you missed. And tune in next episode.
Take care.